Hey, what's going on, guys? At Bert Soren's farm in South Carolina. Big shout out to Sorenex and Bert Soren for hooking it up. We're teaching rewilding here. The students are out there doing a class on primitive survival with Kevin and Stella. I wanted to do a video to talk about two things. One, the USCCA issue, and two, I want to talk about this whole fatherhood thing that I've been doing on social media because I've been getting a lot of feedback, positive feedback mostly. But I want to explain the last post I did regarding my son, Ben, who told me he didn't love me. So I'll break down both if you're interested. This channel is a channel where I do kind of informal stuff. It's stories, it's long form, but it's certainly uncut, unedited. I mean, I don't do a lot of editing to my show Prepared on Mike Glover Actual on that channel. But this is just more raw because I'm typically doing it from a cell phone. So the USCCA issue, I didn't realize how big of a deal it was until I did a plug, an organic plug on Prepared, and people were semi-offended. Some people were wholly offended, but most people were semi-offended. Most people were concerned about the controversy, which I'm all about the opportunity to explain these type of things because I think a lot of context is left out of controversies. I've been in controversies where it's like, what? That's not even what happened. Or that's not even what I said. With context, it allows us obviously to make a better decision. USCCA, I've been supporting for going on 4 years with no financial incentive. Just supporting them because I think they're good for what they do. When I started talking about USCCA, because I was educated on it, there was a local USCCA rep in Heber City, Utah. He covered the area who had been in his own self-defense scenario, and he explained to me what happened and how he was tied up in court for a year, and it was horrible on his health, on his family. Just not a good thing. We teach this course called Personal Defense, where we educate people on things to do before and during and after a self-defense act. And there's plenty of good, competent instructors and trainers teaching people on what to do during a personal defense or self-defense situation. We wanted to holistically approach it and talk about significantly what you need to do even after, because your life, whether you like it or not, is going to change, and potentially a good way or potentially a bad way. Depends on how you look at it. Given the fact that district attorneys across the country are more radical than ever before because they're biased to their own politics and they're influencing their decisions or indecisions based on those politics, it's scary to be a law-abiding citizen because you're technically rolling the dice every single time you put yourself in that situation. Or better yet, somebody else puts you in that situation. So when I did the ad, it was an organic read of USCCA, which we're obviously incentivized as an affiliate by if you sign up, which is very recent, as recent as 2 months ago. But we have no contractual long-term obligation for anything with USCCA. So when I heard there was a controversy, I was concerned because I'm like, I don't like controversy. I don't like drama. I just want to get to work. Like most of you don't like drama. But I went down the rabbit hole. I asked my team to contact USCCA's legal team and find out what the hell's going on. And we did that. We're waiting on them to respond. And we're actually going to have a meeting with their legal. Now, there are two significant cases that have brought about controversy. Those cases are specifically brought up because the perception, at least, is that USCCA dropped their coverage. Now, after doing a lot of research myself and talking to a few people who are very familiar with the case that aren't biased because they don't have no affiliation to USCCA or competition or their competitor, I was able to get some answers. Now, the first thing I was educated on, which you should understand as well as a consumer, is, how do you feel about lawyers? What's your general feeling about lawyers? Generally speaking, I don't like them because the whole thing is murky. How do you feel about insurance agents? Probably because you're following a stigma or stereotype or have dealt with insurance companies. Same. I don't like them. So everybody likes a firefighter. Nobody necessarily likes a lawyer or an insurance agent. So you should understand USCCA is both of those. Albeit we're not the biggest fans. Personally speaking. Albeit you need that coverage because you need to be protected. So that was my kind of stance on it. I would rather not take the chance, given that a lot of people are going to prison or going to jail for a long time because they're being convicted of murder when it's seemingly a clear-cut case of self-defense. My stance on that is pretty solid. Kyle Rittenhouse, when that whole thing went down, I talked to his lawyers, got the information, was very well educated on the subject matter. And I personally, with the assets of my company and all my network, raised about $10,000 for his legal defense. Because I knew everything he did, from my perspective, was as a law-abiding citizen. Now, your personal beliefs, whether or not he should have been there or not, is irrelevant to the actual subject matter of the case and the potential precedent of putting a young man in prison for defending his own life. And obviously I had an incentive because we teach personal defense, and I also appreciate the Constitution and being a law-abiding citizen myself. So some of the things that you look at when you look at controversies are the facts of the matter and then who's putting out the information. Now, there are very good YouTubers who are doing content, who own companies, including lawyers, who have done a lot of good information reporting of the facts of the case. I've watched all of the videos on it. The most educational ones are actually from the guys who are the direct competitors of USCCA. The structural difference is they're representing a law firm that will represent you in that situation versus USCCA's stance as an insurance company that's hiring out legal representation for you. You understand the difference. There's two very significant different business models. One, an insurance policy where lawyers are hired, and two, the alternative, I believe, is having a lawyer on retainer, which is actually the name of the group of guys. It's come out in the last month. This is fairly new. So somebody who jumped on the bandwagon is like, USCCA sucks. I'm indifferent to it. I honestly don't give a shit either way. I give a shit that we're actually representing something that's jacked up, but that's as easy in a fact-finding mission for me to turn off as it is for me to hit record on this phone. That's what I mean. So when I look at this circumstance, you got to realize there's two different models for representation. And in the first case of the male, I'm not going to mention their names. I don't remember their names. I'm not going to mention their names, though, if I had the names right in front of me, because they're ongoing cases. in litigation. I think the female is actually appealing despite her being in prison right now. And the guy got found not guilty on the main charge, but he's still got to work through some other charges. Now, the initial controversy was they were dropped from USCCA because of the fine print. And I think generally speaking, sorry, I got hiccups. I think generally speaking, that's what most people are concerned with. And I'm on that bandwagon. I'm pretty concerned with it because, man, I don't want to be dropped from coverage. And I want to make sure if I'm representing USCCA, and I personally, who have been a member for 3 years, am covered in that worst case scenario. The first case with the male, who it was basically a YouTube hoax. In that case, he actually wrote a letter, which the competition, this isn't biased, this isn't USCCA's stance on it, because I haven't seen any. I've never in the history of my life watched a USCCA video. I just haven't. What I have done is looked into the company, and then I had a rep in Heber City, Utah, and again went, oh man, this is squared away. Talked to a couple people who used USCCA, and was like, oh, really good company, doing really good stuff. They have done thousands of cases regarding self-defense. This guy wrote a letter to USCCA stating that he was not dropped. He instead opted for a public defender. And that letter is advertised or on USCCA's website, but that's his letter. That's the letter he wrote to one of the co-founders. I believe it's Tim or Tom. So with that stance, it's debunking the actual initial reports, which is he was dropped. That's why he had to pick up a public defender. He said he picked the public defender because the public defender was squared away. Because you could pick your legal defense. You know, in the case of a public defender, USCCA doesn't have to pay. So they didn't pay. And there was controversy around that. And he wrote a letter to USCCA. I assume he wrote it. He was asked to write it. I can't imagine he would write a letter just for shits and giggles. I mean, I imagine he wrote it because he was potentially asked. But despite that, it seems like the damage is already done. Because everybody that I see on the comments in my stuff, when I ask the question of like, hey, what's the controversy? Because I don't know. People are like, well, they dropped the dude and he was in the middle of a case. It's like, that didn't actually happen. Now, if you have evidence that letter is a lie or that there was some other circumstance, then send it my way. But even the competitors, the lawyers, what is it called? Lawyers on retainer. They even said in the video talking about the letter that he actually got a public defender. Now, with that, there is some skepticism about the whole entire thing because it was all jacked up. I'm not debunking or countering any of that drama because I'm sure there was. But in the case of the female, it's a little bit more interesting because they did drop her. And the guy, Tim, who's the co-founder of USCCA, states that they did drop her because they knew she was guilty or something like that. And she actually got found guilty because he said something like, it was, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is an exact, it was apparent to us that she was potentially guilty of premeditated murder. Like she bought, again, I don't know all the facts of the case, but what I did read, she bought the gun 12 days before the shooting. She bought the policy 12 days before the shooting. They had Google searches of her looking up things like, not like how to get away with murder, but something like that. Something pretty damn close to that. And so there was a whole bunch of evidence, a litany of evidence. And then I think she shot this dude through the door, who was a mixed martial artist. and she said she was in fear of her life. And there's a whole bunch of premeditated stuff that was used against her and actually found her guilty. And USCCA's stance is if you commit a criminal act, they pull your coverage. What I'm confused about, which is what I'm getting clarity on for you guys' situational awareness, is whether or not it seems that they pulled the coverage before she was found guilty of premeditated murder. That's problematic in my opinion. And the lawyers on retainer brought it up very eloquently, speaking about normal cases of self-defense. If you're being charged with a crime and then you're being backed by USCCA, you have a presumption, I think that's the word, of innocence. But because you're innocent until proven guilty. But in the case of this female, I think they pulled the coverage before she was found guilty because they said, I think subjectively, obviously, because she hasn't been prosecuted, that after reviewing the evidence, they pull her coverage. The reason that is problematic, and according to these lawyers on retainer, is because you might have to, for example, take a plea deal, plead to lesser charges. And me understanding self-defense, the legal ramifications in the legal system, and in my own personal experience with Ben Darby, a police officer in Alabama who was charged with murder, appealed, got his case thrown out, and was going to be charged again. He had to plead to a lesser charge or risk spending, like his initial charge and sentence, damn near the rest of his life in prison. And so he wasn't going to take that chance. So they worked on a plea. So, and when you stack that, if you're being charged for a self-defense shooting, it means the prosecution thinks you're guilty. And so already there's a presumption that they're potentially got evidence or something enough to be able to charge you. So if you're being charged and you're needing defense, and then that's being pulled because of some subjective analysis of information before you're actually found guilty, that's problematic. Now, with all that being said, there might be some kind of like loophole, there might be some kind of contractual thing that says that's not what happened. I don't know that as of yet. And so that's the most problematic component to me, because the insurance company won't deal with you if you've conducted a criminal act, which is an insurance company, but being represented by a legal defense team or lawyer. Is that clear cut? No, it's not. It's very vague and indefinite, which means it's open to debate and subjectiveness. And I'm not trying to have that. I don't want that. I'd actually rather have a lawyer than have a policy that potentially is like, nah. The analogy here, which is a pretty easy one, is like you get a health insurance policy, a healthcare insurance policy. And then you go in for your first check and they're like, Mr. Glover, you look like you got hypertension and we did your numbers and it's not looking good. You might even have cancer. You know what? We're going to cancel your policy and then let's do the test and see if you got it. Oh, you're positive and you got cancer, so sucks to be you, right? I don't like the rolling of the dice that way. With that being said, I don't have all the facts, and I plan to get all those facts from USCCA. So part of it is like, it didn't happen at all because the guy who actually said that he got dropped, he chose a public prosecutor. And the other side is this female got dropped, but she actually was found guilty of premeditated murder. So man, we're juggling some things. These are the two major cases that are both represented by competition content makers, and they still had a pretty balanced approach. I mean, even the competition, these lawyers on retainer said that they think USCCA's got a lot of pros and cons. just as they do. And they were weighing the differences between the two policies. The last component to this is, besides the subjectiveness of like, yeah, we're not sure we're going to cover you, which is scary, is that who decides whether or not that this is potentially a criminal act? And at what point? I know I harped on this a little bit, but it's like when the female, for example, was brought in, let's just say in your case, you have a self-defense shooting. The prosecution thinks you're guilty, so they charge you. You got legal representation. There might be a stack of charges on top of the premeditated or involuntary manslaughter, whatever it is, that include weapons charges. So even with a weapons charge, like you had a pistol and you were carrying it legally, but you exceeded the max capacity of the magazine or something like that. That's a bad example, but that's an example. And then you were charged a misdemeanor for that, technically because you're found, you have one of the charges that it's a clear-cut case, like you got a 15-round mag and you're only allowed a 10-rounder. They could be like, hey, we're not doing this. And that also includes, this is the last part, recovery and recoupment of their investment. Now, I don't know what the hell that means, but what it basically means, I don't know what it means in detail, but what it basically means is you catch a charge, they pull that, you literally could have to pay back that policy, that insurance policy, and that $50,000 retainer that they threw down on a lawyer of your choice. With that being said, it says, I heard in the letter, or I read in the letter, that the gentleman said he could have had any attorney he wanted to, unlimited coverage of any attorney. But that's not true. In the fine print of the contract, it actually says they have the right to assign counsel. And in good standing, they won't. They allow you to choose. But in the contract, it says they have the right to assign. So which is it? These are the clarifications that I need to continue to support the USCCA. I believe everything they're doing is on the up and up. There are anomalies like these cases. When you compare these cases to the thousands of cases, including several people that I know that I've talked to who have been represented and represented well, I could see the kind of juggling and the kind of anomaly that this is, which is what happens when the person is potentially a criminal? What happens when the person potentially is in the wrong? Then what happens? These are all normal things, guys. It's not like every single self-defense act is a clear-cut case and the person isn't guilty. Some of these people are actually murderers. Some of these people are actually killers, and they did something negligent or they did something deliberate, and now they're saying, hey, I want legal representation from an insurance policy, which is part of the issue here. So with all that said, that's a very long-winded way of saying we have a meeting with their legal team. We're going to get very clear clarification on it, and you're owed that. You should look. I was told that Tim, is it Tim or Tom? I get them confused. I was told that Tim has come out and said very specifically what happened and the stance on it. With that being said, anytime a company comes out, I'm always skeptical. I want to hear it, but I'm skeptical because it's like they're going to be biased in the first place. But when it comes to the facts of the matter in a legal case, they can't afford to be biased. They have to spew the facts. I think the lawyers and retainer guys said that the statement they put out had some holes in it because there were things they didn't clarify, but we intend to clarify it. With all that being said, you're a consumer and you can choose whatever you want. I stand by our integrity in working with people. I think USCCA is a good policy. I think they're good people, but I will not continue moving forward to support him until I get clarification on the things that I just lined out. And I think that's fair. That's reasonable, right? I think that's what everybody should be doing, especially if you're representing a company that does something as serious as representing you in a self-defense act where you're asked to go to jail forever. Let's talk about this kid post. I posted this thing on social media about my kid, my son, Ben. I got twins. Ben is the love of my life. My kids are the loves of my life. I love them very much. My family is very important to me. And my son, after a really fun week in Moab with my family, all the guys from Fieldcraft, we had a blast. Came home, and then when I told him he needed to go to sleep, not angrily, he needed to go to bed, he said, "Daddy, I don't love you. I want to go to mommy's house." Now, he knew he was going to his mom's house very soon. And every time he knows he's going to his mom's house, he gets anxious. Whether it's he wants to be with his mom, whether it's the separation from his mom or separation from me. On the way to drop him off to his mom's, he's told me his stomach hurts. So he deals with some of that anxiousness, and I hate it. It breaks my heart, but it's just the nature of what happens when people separate in relationships and kids are torn somewhere in the middle. The reason I posted that is because I want to be frank and honest with you guys on parenting, especially the fathers out there. Fathering, being a good father, being a good dad is hard because it's a constant battle. There isn't going to be a success or failure metric that you could identify. It's not that clearly lined out. It's very difficult. And don't have an expectation it's going to be anything different. I want you to enjoy the journey and realize you shouldn't be defining whether it's a win or loss. Being a parent and being able to take care of your kids is always a win, but understand that it's going to suck sometimes. Hearing that from my son's voice while the boys laying next to me in bed broke my heart. It really hurt. But I knew if I was to be very emotional about it, it would not map well because little boys, like little girls, have big feelings, big emotions, and it's just something that happens. You got to work through it with them. You got to talk to them, and that's how you'll deal with it. Guys, I hope you guys follow along. I typically post family stuff. I'll do it on here if you guys are interested on my backup Instagram at Mike Glover Actual. I also have a YouTube channel called Mike Glover Actual that I'll link down below. I appreciate you guys and hope you have a good evening, and I'll talk to you soon next week when I do Prepared. Later, guys.